Hi everyone, I'm Alyssa. Welcome to a monthly wrap-up. This is October. I'm excited to share the books I read with you. I read 10 books in total, though I must warn you, I did most of my reading in the second half of the month, which I did make a vlog about. So if you've seen that vlog, this is going to be a little bit redundant. On top of that, I've been talking about a few of these books in my recent videos. So again, even more redundant if you have seen those. But it's kind of nice to have all of the books in one little video anyway. So I'm going to run through these pretty quickly, especially these first two, which I've already talked about a few times. The first one is Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind by Yuval Noah Harari. This is, as I've said before, an anthropological history of Homo sapiens. It is phenomenal. It is so fascinating. It's lots of history, lots of also biological, like evolutionary biology / anthropology / history, just a whole bunch of sort of context about how the evolution of humans is found sort of in the fabric of our history, and then how our behavior as humans throughout history has also sort of shaped how we've evolved to be our present condition. There's so much of this that is very, very interesting. It is both long but shockingly short for how much it covers. I thought it was absolutely phenomenal. I've said this before. It's one of those books that makes you think a lot, and I mean, it's been pretty well known, so you've probably heard of this before, but if you need a final nudge to pick it up, let this be the one, because it's definitely worth your time. It's just absolutely phenomenal. The next book that I read, which actually I listened to both Sapiens and Genghis Khan and the Making of the Modern World by Jack Weatherford. I've also talked about this in some recent videos, and this is a relatively short, to be honest, for its length, history of Genghis Khan. It sort of starts with the span of his life, and we learn all about his childhood and sort of how he came to be the figure that he was in history. And then I would say about halfway through the book, you then transition to the rest of his life, after his life. And it covers the rest of sort of his empire as run by his children for a few generations, and then the lasting effect of that empire on the world, and eventually sort of ends with our modern conception of Genghis Khan and where that comes from, which, spoiler alert, is mostly not from based in historical fact. A lot of, especially Western conception of Genghis Khan comes from Enlightenment and Victorian era writers who were a little bit racist. So a lot of this sort of gruesome and aggressive behavior that he's characterized by is not completely unfounded, but it is exaggerated outside of the context that he also did a lot of really cool things that our modern world benefits from. And he was a very sophisticated leader, not just sort of this backward barbaric character that he's oftentimes considered to be, or thought of or characterized as. I thought that was really phenomenal, and I've been really interested in reading books that are sort of looking at history from outside of a Western perspective. As an American, I feel like a lot of my education was very focused on, oh gosh, a little stray hair there. It was very complementary to the American mythology and a little Western centric, to say the least. So I've been very interested in books that are looking at history from a non-Western perspective, and I feel that this is sort of one of those books that really sort of enlightens another part of the world. If you have any books along those lines, by the way, I would love for you to recommend them to me. The next book that I read is A Monster Calls by Patrick Ness. This is, I think I said it another time that it's a graphic novel. It's not. It has some pictures and things, but it's a juvenile fiction about a boy whose mother is sick with cancer, and sometimes, some nights, a monster comes and visits him, and he is scared of this monster, but then it's sort of a little more like a metaphorical journey that the monster tells him stories. And I picked it up because I thought it was going to be good for the Halloween mood, but it's actually a lot more this exploration of processing grief, and I thought it was really beautiful in that sense. I would definitely recommend it to someone in that context, especially. I think it does well on the juvenile level. It sort of has some metaphorical characterizations that are really beautiful, and I think would work well for a juvenile level. Didn't really get me in the spooky mood, so I moved on to a few other books that I thought would help me with that a little bit more. The next one is The Devil in the White City by Erik Larson. I don't understand what's happening here, but it's driving me absolutely nuts. So let's do that. Okay. Oh well. Okay, so the next book is The Devil in the White City by Erik Larson, and this is a nonfiction book about the 1893 Chicago World's Fair and a serial killer that was living just down the street from the fair and operating in that time period. The book is very historical. I think that if you're going to read this book, something you should know is that the serial killer element, which does feel like the hook, like that's the thing that you're very interested in, it is a minority of the story. I would say that the Chicago, like the fair and the historical context of the fair, how it came about, going through sort of all the bureaucracy of how you make such a project come to life, and all of the like characters, the architects, the people designing the fair, that is the backbone of the story, and that is the majority of the story. And then on top of that, there is this serial killer. A complaint that I have seen on Goodreads is that these are two stories that are not actually very connected, and I would say that I was really engrossed in the book, and so I didn't really notice that while I was reading it. So I wouldn't say it's personally a complaint of mine because I didn't have that issue as an experience, but I think that's a very valid complaint because actually it's true. It just sort of happens that this serial killer was within the vicinity of the fair, and he doesn't really have anything to do with the fair. I wouldn't pick up this book if you are looking for the serial killer story and that's the only part that interests you. I would say you need to have some like interest in the history of the World's Fair as well. But I really enjoyed the book and I thought it was worth my time. I did listen to it. I don't know if I would have put the effort in to read it, but it was worth listening to. And the next book I have to talk about is Graveyard Book by Neil Gaiman. This is a juvenile fiction about a boy who is raised in a graveyard. It's super cute. At the beginning, his family is murdered and they live next to a graveyard, and he just sort of runs away and then is raised by ghosts there. I think that Neil Gaiman's storytelling is just really solid. It feels like his books are very well orchestrated. They're constructed. I thought this book was really cute. Juvenile fiction's not normally my thing, so I doubt that I will think much about this book or remember it very clearly, but I have no complaints. I think it did a good job of being a cute children's, somewhat spooky book. It did a good job of that. I then also read Matrix by Lauren Groff. This book has been getting buzz lately, at least in my algorithm it has been. This is a story, this is a historical fiction novel. It takes place in south of England and follows a woman named Marie who is an abbess. This is about an abbey of women. It's very like this like female paradise of all these women sort of becoming increasingly self-sufficient, and that becomes increasingly sort of threatening to the surrounding people and like the culture that all of these women are sort of creating their own little world that they live in. The character of Marie is based on Marie de France, who is a poet, a real historical figure and a poet, and there's not much we know about her except that there are these poems that she wrote, and she seems to have been like a somewhat like a relatively influential character for a woman of this time. And I thought that was a really interesting historical sort of context to create this this book, because it does work within the confines of some historical precedent that we have for this character, but for the most part this character is very unknown. Very little is known about her. So I thought Lauren Groff did a really good job with that, a historical framework that is filled in with a lot of fictional story that is very, very interesting. And that, I have lots of thoughts on historical fiction actually, but that is the formula of when I think historical fiction works well. I have a lot more to say about that, but we're gonna leave it there for now. The next book that I finished is The Perfect Nanny by Leila Silmani. This is translated from the French, and I think in Europe it's known by Lullaby, excuse me, which I had a hard time finding this book because I was searching for Lullaby everywhere. This book I remember seeing a few years ago on BookTube. A lot of people reading it. I specifically remember Helene Jepsen, who I don't think makes BookTube videos anymore, which is really sad because I absolutely loved her stuff. But anyway, I remember this getting a lot of buzz, and maybe I'm remembering wrong, but I found this to be really anticlimactic. It is about a nanny. You open the book with 2 children dead and a mother crying, and then you sort of go backwards in time and follow this little family and them getting a nanny, and this nanny, you learn about her. It obviously has some class commentary, the way that this nanny is entirely incorporated into their life, and this family's life cannot function without her, and yet she is very othered, and they clearly somewhat like cognitively understand her necessity to their life, but also feel a resistance to like seeing her as an equal to them, and she definitely feels that. I do think this is very interesting in terms of class commentary, but the book reminded me a lot of the movie Parasite, this idea, but I thought that that was actually a much more compelling exploration, but it's a similar idea along those lines. Most of all, I found it really forgettable, which is sad, and I don't have anything else to say on it. Okay, the next book I read is Dracula by Bram Stoker. This book I've wanted to read for a really long time, but I was off-put by how long it was, and I was scared it's going to be very boring. I'm happy to report that it actually has a really surprisingly fast pace for a Victorian novel of this size, at least in my opinion. You're very quickly introduced to Dracula and in his mansion, his castle in Transylvania, and sort of learning these things about vampires. And then surprisingly, quite a bit of the book happens back in England and doesn't involve Dracula directly, like he's not present for it. Something I really liked about this book, I mentioned the vlog, so I'm not going to go into it more here, though I don't know I necessarily explained it very well there, but I found there to be a surprising amount of sort of scientific discussion in the book, like scientific and medical and sort of like early psychological. But what I felt like was happening was this expression of how the Victorians really liked to categorize things and were sort of flexing their muscles of some recent scientific revolutions that gave them more tools for explaining the natural world, like evolution and like a lot of scientific discoveries during the Victorian era. But it's sort of being drawn out into explaining the supernatural world, which was sort of interesting in this fictional context. I really liked that, and it has given me a lot to think about, actually. I then also read The Turn of the Screw by Henry James. This is a Victorian novel as well, and I read it because it was supposed to be very scary, but I don't have much to say about it because, as I mentioned in my vlog, I really didn't jive with the reading style, like the writing style, and so I found it really hard to pay attention to, and I especially didn't find it very scary for that reason. It's about a woman who is nannying a few children in this mansion, and there just are a lot of things she keeps on seeing. I don't know, I just really didn't find it all that scary or that interesting either, so I don't really have anything else to say about it. The last book I read is actually a very short story, and it's called The Most Dangerous Game by Richard Connell. And this is a story about a man who is a hunting enthusiast, and he's on a boat and they pass an island, and he discovers that all the natives are very scared of this island, and then he is like thrown overboard, not on purpose, he gets thrown overboard and then is stranded on this island. And I'm not gonna really say anything about it. The premise is definitely disturbing, but I feel like the tone keeps it from ever getting like very scary. I can't say anything more than that. I would say it's not bad because it's like so short, but I don't think I'll really remember it very much. Like, it wasn't all that interesting, and it feels like a very sad note to end this wrap up on a book that was not that interesting. But I definitely had some really good books that I read this month, and I'm pleased with my reading. If you want like any additional thoughts, I would suggest you check out my vlog because I've talked more about a lot of these books there. Anyway, I think that's all for this video. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in another one. Bye!